Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum, where I try to have intelligent material on the channel. Hence why I put the word Lyceum in the title, which most people don't even recognize what the word means. But either way, I'm here today with a guest. It has been a couple months since I've had someone on the channel, and today I'm with Logan Kearsley, who was very kind enough to come on and to, well, we'll talk about various things, but kind of just language is the idea, and in writing and other things. Anyways, so um, I talked to Logan at LTV this slash, I guess it was just a couple months ago,
Yep.
and which is just a writing conference down in Utah, and but Logan is a linguist. Um, he does other things for his day job, I think.
Yeah.
And,
I
but
daylight as a programmer.
which we can accept this,
Yeah.
and a worthwhile pursuit, though a little different than linguistics, to say the least. But you gave well, actually. So before I get there, actually, you were on a podcast called Theory Neutral with two other
Yep.
hosts, and you talk about linguistic stuff.
hmm
I It seems like I've listened to a couple, and if I'm remembering correctly, you kind of go over like papers or topics in a sense. Um,
Yeah. Generally typology papers.
yeah, and so I remember I watched the one earlier today actually just to reintroduce myself to the podcast before I was talking to you, and it was on
hmm
the I don't even remember the phrase. It was connotative animal.
Oh, connotative animal calls.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
so
was fun.
that was interesting. Which actually seems to me kind of to relate to a book I'm reading now. Sorry, there's something stuck in my throat. But I'm reading To Ride Hell's Chasm by Janie Wirtz, and there's like horses in the book, I guess, and so she like has like these calls,
hmm
these commands for the horses, and I'm just like, I don't get this at all. Like I do not understand. It's not just like giddy up or whoa or anything like that. It's like she's saying like other
hmm
things. I'm like, I don't understand. All right. So, but it was interesting to be reading that book and then to listen to the podcast episode. But anyways, Theory Neutral is available in podcast places. It's also on YouTube, which is where I just like to listen to my stuff. Um, and you also have your own YouTube channel, Logan Kearsley, um, and where you recently read through all of Beowulf, and in Old English, I should say. And then there's also the blog, which you were just sharing with me, a linguistically interesting media index. All this will be linked below, though, in the description, so anyone can go and listen and or read this stuff that Logan is putting out there for people like me. And but at LTE, you gave one presentation. And you gave that presentation on portraying multiple languages.
Yep.
And the blurb, I have it. I took a screenshot. The blurb for that
Oh,
says,
nice.
if all of your characters speak the same language, you can usually pretend it's just English. But if it's not English, acknowledging that fact can add flavor. And if there are multiple languages involved, how do you show that? And so I rolled up to Utah, and this is the first thing I went to. Actually, I didn't even like stop to do anything. I just walk into LTE. I go to the desk real quick, get my stuff, and then I walk over to Logan's presentation because I was a couple hours late because there was a bad snowstorm at the time.
hmm
So, but I made it on time for this, which is actually what I wanted to do. So I'm glad I did. It was definitely worthwhile. But all right, before I just keep on rambling for an hour, Logan.
Yeah.
My first thought when I saw this, actually, I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, um, and um, my first thought was common in Dungeons and Dragons, and how much I dislike how common is used. Do you play any Dungeons and Dragons, Logan? Or familiar with it, I guess?
I have played Dungeons and Dragons. I do not have a whole ton of free time to have been playing it recently, but yeah, I have played Dungeons and Dragons and some other tabletop RPGs.
Yeah, that's good. I understand the time element. It's kind of a killer, to be honest. Actually,
Yeah.
but
Actually, and I have done some consulting for Shoestone Publishing, which is a very small indie TTRPG publisher. But they brought me on as a freelance contractor for a new TTRPG property called Drinterra. And kind of one of the driving motivations for this project is that they wanted to kind of break out of stereotypes and like show more cultural diversity among different standard fantasy races. So part of that is they wanted to actually show that, you know, orcs don't just speak Orcish. There's like Northern Orcish and Desert Orcish, and there's like they are diverse like humans are.
yeah.
So they had me come on and construct a couple of pre-made conlangs for GMs to make use of.
That is that's pretty cool. That kind of answers that problem of common. Well, not in just not just that, I guess, but like, okay, because when I play Dungeons and Dragons, for example, I'm not gonna be like super like anal about like the language aspects, right? But it makes a lot more sense that when you are in a world that is a world, right? That you wouldn't just have one common language and literally everyone speaks it. No one ever has an accent. And it's just one, like there's no dialect at all, right? It's just one big boom language. And they call it common, which is like the stupidest name for a language ever. I mean, like, not exactly, right? I mean, there's some languages out there that literally mean like of the people, or you know, or like, you know, just the they do mean common, like old French. The old French word for common is romance, right? You know what I mean? So like,
yeah.
So I mean, in Deutsch,
isn't that basically what koine means?
I think so. Yes, my Greek is not very great.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, it is a thing. I get that, but like at the same time, like, but there's a lot more nuance to, you know, Koine Greek. You know what I mean? Like, because there's other types of Greek, and there's a lot of other languages around the area, right? You know, and just saying, hey, everyone speaks common. Why? Because I'm lazy, pretty much, right? And so it's just like it's the same thing with those racial languages, right? Like Elven or Elvish or Dwarf or Dwarven, Dwarvish, whatever you want to call it, you know, Orcish. That it's just lazy stuff, and then when they actually do put in like the words, right? Like, oh, here's the words, you know, here you're reading that. Okay, I read a lot of D&D novels, right? And you just like randomly you're reading the D&D novel, and it's like, oh, here's this Elvish phrase, right? And it's just like nonsense, right? Like they didn't think about it at all, right? It just sounds cool enough to them. The most egregious ones are like R.A. Salvatore when he's like in the Crystal Shard, or when he's just like, oh yes, Crystal Shard. In Elvish it is Crystal Tirith. I'm like, that is terrible. like Crystal instead of Crystal. And then he confuses Minas Tirith, which Minas is tower, right? And Tirith doesn't mean tower, but he's like he means Tirith means tower here, actually, like the crystal tower of the Crystal Shard. And so it's just awful. But I don't know, Logan, you break up a little bit. No, okay. It seems like we have slight connectivity issues. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm. So far, I think I have heard all of your actual questions so that I can respond to them, but you are cutting in and out.
Yeah, I don't know what to do. But my internet access says it's doing okay, but I don't know if it's StreamYard. But anyways, again, I'm just keeping on going on. I think
Yeah.
I think from when I listened to your presentation, is I think it was really useful as a way to not have egregious sounding conlangs in a sense, or even like just like, oh yeah, they all speak the same language, even though they're on different continents or something like that, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, in that particular presentation, I didn't really go over the how to make it sound good bits. I've done that in other cases. I've done presentations for writing groups and previous LTUEs and some other things, uh, and yeah, I have. Well, actually, at that LTUE, I was only supposed to do the one presentation, but then we had a cancellation
that's right,
later
yeah.
that I got asked to fill in for, so I kind of did a impromptu introduction to how to do conlanging if you want to write a novel and you don't want to get sucked into world building spirals and never actually write your novel. So yeah, I guess I did do some of the how do you make it not sound like crap there. Yeah, but my main thing was more maybe you've got a conlang, maybe you've got something that's set in the real world approximately, and like people actually do speak different languages. So how do you use that? How do you actually put it into the text and not annoy people?
I think what's funny when you say not annoy people is my first instinct is just do it really poorly, right? But I think in another sense, it could also just mean like you get way too into it and like you're like you're just
Yeah.
gonna, right? Because if it's all like, if it's all world building stuff that doesn't seem important, people aren't going to want to read it, right? It's the stuff
Right.
that a lot of cases goes at the back of the book and not at the front normally, because
Yep.
people are just going to skip it in that case, and they might not read
Yep.
the book if they see it at the front.
Yep.
But,
and then you got like Tolkien putting whole page poems in Elvish just in the middle of the text with no translation, and like that worked for his purposes because Tolkien wasn't trying to go for mass market appeal. He managed it anyway, but like he wrote the book so that he would have an excuse to show off the languages. So he showed off the languages, and if you want to skip over it, like that's your problem. But for most people,
and it is a problem. We don't skip.
Yeah, for most people, that's not going to work, and having readers skip over a page of text and then think I have no idea what was going on here is not the kind of reader experience that I think most novelists are going for.
That's a bit restricting, to say the least.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of authors have a tendency to be too hand-holdy. Right, when I read like Brandon Sanderson, for example, I just feel like he thinks I'm dumb. Right, but like at the same time, you don't want to do the opposite unless you're like that's exactly what you're going for. But then you're probably like Gene Wolfe or something, and I'm not Gene Wolfe, right? I mean, so like, so it's not going to work for most people. And when I say most, I mean like 99% of people.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, I think this may have been less true in the past, but we are at a stage of cultural evolution right now where people seem to be a lot more okay with not English on the screen and on the page. I actually went to the 11th Language Creation Conference a couple weeks ago, and the opening plenary talk by John Scott, not to be confused with YouTuber Tom Scott, totally different people. He gave a really interesting kind of cultural, historical talk about how conlangs are cultural artifacts and thus worthy of academic study, just like any other cultural artifact, art and literature and so forth. And he tied the beginning of the acclimatization of American audiences to non-English dialogue back to the German film Das Boot. Because it was a German film, but it became really popular in America, despite being in German. And they didn't dub it; they just put subtitles on the screen, and it was a financial success anyway. And so, like after that, then people were like, "Oh, hey, maybe we can, make the Russian spies speak Russian and put subtitles on the screen. And maybe sometimes we don't put subtitles on the screen. Ooh." So there's like a direct line from Das Boot to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Or no, it's not The Wrath of Khan. It's 3, The Search for Spock, where there's that submarine battle in space. Or was it? Yeah, it is number 3. It's number 3. That's where they, because they've got the submarine battle in space going on in The Wrath of Khan and with Khan, but then they do basically the same thing in 3 with the Klingon ship, and like that's where Klingon really started to get used. It became a thing. And yeah, since then it's just been an upward trend with like faster and slower in some years and decades than others, but like that kicked things off, and now people are generally okay with subtitles. So part of what I want to get across to authors and screenwriters is that there are definitely ways to do it badly, and you should be afraid of screwing up and annoying your readers and making them throw your book across the room. But you don't need to be as afraid as most people, I think, are. Because a lot of the creators that I have talked to, as opposed to audience members that I've talked to, seem to think that people are a lot less willing to engage with multilingual content than they actually are. So like get over the hesitancy, go ahead and include realistic linguistic diversity in your fiction. It'll be fine. You just need to know how to do it right.
Right. Yeah, no, I so yeah, in a sense that your presentation then was kind of like awareness almost, right? Like to point out things that you don't want to be so much as blind spots, I guess, for the people who probably don't think so much about it. Or at least don't know what to think about it if they do think about it. Right. So but and it's funny because I think it differs, right? I mean, or differs. Sorry. Like when you're doing something in the real world, getting a real language seems like a lot of work in some sense, assuming you don't know the language, right? But then when you're doing a fantasy or fictional world or even science fiction or whatever, and you're doing it's like constructed language, then that's also a lot of work in some ways, but it's a different type of work.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean,
well, the nice thing about doing a conlang though is that you effectively can't get it wrong, because if you're making the Jason Bourne films, then you can get it wrong, and they do. The Russian in those films is so embarrassingly bad. But if it were a conlang, then you could just say what's on the screen is correct, and we're going to adjust. And if something looks inconsistent, then that was just in a regular form. And that's how
pretty much.
Yeah, that's how Klingon has developed. Like that's why Klingon is not a perfectly regular, obviously artificial language, because the actors on screen screw it up sometimes. And then Mark Okran says, well, a Klingon said it, so it must be right. So we'll figure out how to fit it in.
It's lore now.
Yep, it's lore now. And you can do that. So it's, it is a lot of work to build a complete conlang, but most of the time you don't need a complete conlang. And even when you do, you've still got that, you've got that safety net of, I decided what the rules are, so I cannot be wrong by definition.
Yes.
Actually, for a really good example of where you really do need a pretty well fleshed out conlang, the last few episodes of Andor are amazing. I haven't gotten around to reviewing it yet because I want to watch the relevant episodes a few more times to make sure I'm not missing anything. But super brief overview. They wanted to. Okay, so this might be minorly spoilery, but I'm going to try to avoid any serious spoilers. There's this planet Gorman, which the Empire is being really crappy to, and the writers wanted to use the Gorman resistance front as an analog to the French resistance, or looking at it the other way around, they wanted to evoke connections to the French resistance in World War II to help flesh out the culture and the motivations of the rebellion cell on this particular planet. And so they couldn't use French. Well, I mean, they could have used French, I guess. They could have just stuck French in there and said, you know, we're translating Galactic Basic into English, we're translating Gormanese into French, whatever. But they didn't, and I'm glad they didn't. They had somebody actually develop a conlang that was well enough fleshed out that like 50% of the dialogue in one whole episode could be entirely in Gormanese. I don't think that's what it's officially called, but you know what I mean. And so they constructed something that uses French phonetics and phonotactics. So when you first hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds like French. And I immediately went, okay, this sounds like French. But if it were French, I would understand at least a little bit of it. And I don't understand any of this. So it's not French. But if you pay attention, like there's consistency, there's a realistic level of variation in what people are saying, but there's also like consistency between you hear the same kinds of things when the subtitles say the same kind of things. So like I was pretty sure that it was real before I went and looked up the behind the scenes making of stuff, which is good. Like that you know you've done a good job when somebody hears it and is like, I can't understand this, but this actually does sound like a real language and not gibberish. But they needed that in there for the rhetorical effect that they wanted to get out of the story. And then the way that they integrated it was a lot of just put up subtitles, because you can do that in film. It's harder to do subtitling in text. There are equivalent techniques, but really subtitling is a film thing. And so when you're doing film, that's the easiest thing to do. Everybody does it. You can get away with it. It's fine. But there are a couple of scenes where they do diegetic translation. So there is somebody in the scene who is an off-worlder who does not speak the language and needs to know what is being said, so somebody else is translating for them. And like that's another separate technique, independent of subtitling. You could just do that. That's basically what Star Wars does most of the time with all the gibberish alien stuff. They'll have somebody making Wookiee noises, and supposedly they're speaking Shriwook, but there's no subtitles because it doesn't actually mean anything, and somebody else will just respond in a contextually appropriate way or explain to somebody else what was said. But in this case, they actually did both at the same time. I think it is possible that I am attributing to them more intent than they actually had. So if it turns out you go and watch it and there weren't subtitles for that portion, sorry for misleading you, but there should have been subtitles for that portion, because with both going on at the same time, then you can look at literally what is being said and compare it to what is being translated in world, and it introduces a level of dramatic irony, which is not like plot relevant,
Mm-hmm.
but it feels more engaging to look at that and say, oh, I understand how the interpretation is working because I can see the slight disconnect between what is actually being said and the little bit that this character is getting through the simultaneous interpreter.
Yeah. That's it. That does add to like the it kind of has, like I said, like you said, it's kind of a dramatic effect, but it's also just realistic, right? I mean, like you seem pretty excited about it because you noticed the good job they seemingly did on it. I haven't watched like any TV really much at all, actually, but it's not any of the Star Wars stuff. But I did recently do like a presentation on the word Viking, but I was looking at the Old English Orosius, for example, and the Old English. I can look at the Old English and I need to translate it for the audience because I just don't assume the audience speaks Old English. And then in this case, it's just viewers, right? And then there's also Latin, the Latin that the Old English was translating originally, and they're not the same, right? So I translated both, right? And I'm like, you can see the differences here, right? Like I tried to be as literal as I could for both of them, right? And that's just how language works in a lot of ways. But also it is also how the person interprets it, and then how they choose to express it in a sense, right? Because I imagine maybe the Old English scribe could have been more literal with the Latin. It just chose not to, right? So I mean, but
part of translation is cultural adaptation, not just literal moving words from one language to another.
Right. Yeah. It's a big what's the word? Like you're kind of editing as you go in a sense. So which is a lot of work actually, but so but I'm glad we mentioned Star Wars though, because it is May the 4th when we're recording this.
It is. Yes.
But you mentioned Russian earlier, and I think I saw in your biography that you speak Russian. Is that
yes, Russian is technically my third language, but it is my strongest second language because I started learning French first, but my French sucks.
Well, likewise. Well, not likewise on the Russian, but likewise on the French. And so, no, that's interesting. I kind of wanted to like put the gag in here where I asked the linguists how many languages they speak, right? But I like I don't know. One
if
actually
you know,
people do ask me that sometimes, but so like but no, I was curious about the Russian thing. But I have like no command of any Slavic thing, pretty much at all. But but no, that is I think actually understanding, and you don't have to learn a foreign language, I'd say, even to do like something like a constructed language. I do think having an understanding of language, kind of like grammar and like semantics a little bit and stuff like that, right? Like does help, right? Because most English speakers, for example, don't even think about a lot of this stuff as English speakers. We're not going to think about conjugation because we hardly conjugate at all, right? You know what I mean? So like until you have to take Spanish or French in school or something like that, or you're not going to think about the subjunctive until again you take Spanish or French in school, even though there is a subjunctive kind of in English still, so like so it's just like
dying.
Yes, sadly. But it still survives in idioms decently well. Anyways, but I like my coworker is Vietnamese, the one I like talk to the most at work, because she's like kind of my boss. And it's fun talking to her because she asks me like language stuff, right? And I can actually talk to someone about it because she's actually curious, right? And so like I like in a sense in almost like a prescriptive sense to like help her, like with her English, right? Because that's what she wants, right? But it's just like it's fun, right? To talk about this stuff in a sense. But
I think for most Conlang creators, the it kind of goes in the opposite direction. Like, yeah, it helps to have linguistic education to make a good conlang or to do it quickly. It's like, good, fast, cheap, pick two. So you can make a crappy conlang fast with no education in linguistics, or you can make a good conlang fast with expensive education in linguistics, or you can make a good one really slow without knowing any linguistics beforehand. But I think the vast majority of people
you could make it really well and really slowly, and not because you don't have the education, but just because you're Tolkien or something like that.
Exactly. But yeah, I think the vast majority of people who get into conlanging do not come at it from like, I already know a bunch of languages, or I have formally studied linguistics and now I'm going to play with it. It tends to be more, oh, this is a thing that you can do. I want to figure out how to do it. And then they start learning linguistics to support their ability to make better conlangs. But I know several very community prominent conlangers, like not the sort of people who would be famous in daily life, but like if you're in the community, people know who they are. Who have absolutely no formal linguistic training from any point in their life. But they've been at it for a long time and they've picked stuff up, and they create artwork that is as good as anything that you'll find from a professional linguist.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of that is, just the passion for it, right, in a sense. I do remember when I was, I don't remember, some years ago, I joined like the Discord for, what's it called, like Vinye Lamen Golmo or something like that, right? It's some Tolkien like Elvish. I don't remember. That sounds kind of like Quenya to me, because apparently I've heard enough Sindarin and Quenya to maybe distinguish them, but I'm not even sure because I'm probably wrong. Someone's going to correct me. Anyways, but right, and some of those people in the community, I do remember they'd they'd have like a bachelor's in linguistics or something like that or whatever, but a lot of them didn't, right? They're just it's just the passion, like which, I mean, passion works, and in fact, I would say like in a lot of ways, passion without the formal educations, in a lot of ways, still can make you a scholar, so to speak. But it is interesting though, because now, when I think of Conlangs, besides thinking of something like Tolkien, right? I'm kind of like integrated into fantasy booktube, not so much on purpose, but I am, and so Tolkien comes to mind. I also think of something like Christopher Rocchio. He actually has like a conlang in his sci-fi series, which I think he kind of regrets, actually talking to him about it. So like mostly is like he doesn't remember the rules pretty much, and so when he writes his next book in the series, like, I got to go back and make sure I get this right, like, type of thing, right? Because he wants to make sure he's consistent, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it's just work, right? And so like which is actually one of the reasons I don't actually do conlangs all that much when I do any writing. I used to, but I was like, wow, that's a lot of work. So like,
it is.
Or at least the way I want to do it.
That is the one rule that you do have to follow is, if it's not consistent, it's not a conlang. Like, you can screw it up and then like retroactively justify it, but if you don't have a baseline level of consistency, then what even is the point? You're not. There are a lot of literary techniques that you cannot pull off if it is not real under the hood.
Right.
But on the other hand, it is work, but like, it's the same kind of work as any other continuity issue. If you say the main character's eyes are blue in book 1, you got to remember that if you mention their eye color again in book 3. So,
though that doesn't always happen, some editors miss that. Anyway, but I mean, there is always the easy route of the hand waving stuff, right? Like you don't actually have the language at all. You just say, "Oh, they were speaking in their language," and maybe someone recognizes like one word, right? And you don't actually have to spell out the word at all. You don't actually have to have the word in existence, right? Just like, oh, I just recognize the word vermin or whatever, right? You know, like,
right.
But then that's in some ways that makes it easier, though, right? But at the same time, it's just like it also depends on what you want to go for, right? Because I mean, you've looked at this a lot. I can tell you've looked at like a lot of different varieties of like situations and whatnot, right? Because like you know, someone like Tolkien, he just liked language, and for some reason, he really particularly liked making his own, right? And so like, and some people really like. I mean, I think Tolkien gets a good sense of verisimilitude with that, right? I'm not sure if that's what he was going for, or maybe he had the thought, right? You know what I mean? Like, but I also don't know if he's just like he was thinking that much about it in some sense. But a lot of people they do like the language aspect or Conlangan aspects because it does give a sense of verisimilitude, right? Where something like we mentioned earlier, like D&D Common or Orcish doesn't, it falls flat completely, right? Like they didn't completely ignore language, right? Because there's language is there, right? But they literally did like the least amount of work that they could have.
So I actually used to be kind of picky about language veracity, insofar as like if you could use a real language or create a proper conlang and you didn't, then I'd be like, it would have been better if you put in the effort. But having researched this for several years now, I've kind of gotten over that. And there are certain cases where I really wish that somebody had used a conlang to make the work better. But it's not every case. And there are a lot of techniques that you can use to bring in the verisimilitude of representing that there are other languages present without actually having to show them on the page. And furthermore, there are, especially in sci-fi, maybe you could probably swing some of this for fantasy too, but it's really, really obvious in science fiction. There are certain premises that preclude the possibility of representing the language on the page or on the screen. So like with Arrival, the film adaptation of A Story of Your Life, moving that on screen was always going to be hard. And you'll find a lot of people who are ticked off at how they did Heptapod B in the movie, because it's just nothing like how it's described in the book. But on the other hand, the way it's described in the book is a thing that nobody knows how to do. Like, human languages just fundamentally don't work that way, and that's the point. And I have yet to encounter a conlanger who has created something that fits the description. Like there's a bunch of people who have been inspired by that story to make really interesting artistic writing systems, but every single one of them will tell you, no, it doesn't actually do what Heptapod B does. Even if you leave out the explicitly sci-fi element of like it lets you see the future. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but just making something that functions graphically the way that it's supposed to function is a difficult problem to solve. And so Ted Chiang didn't need to worry about that because he just didn't actually put images in the text, and it's fine. You could just describe what it's supposed to be like and how the characters respond to it when you don't have to put it on the screen. And let's see, another example would be Babel 17. Like, if you tried to do a movie adaptation of Babel 17, then theoretically, knowing Babel 17, like the whole point of it is that knowing that language is supposed to do stuff to your brain and change your personality.
Right.
And so, like, that's not a thing that can happen in reality. So if you created a conlang for that and then people learned it, then they'd be like, this doesn't do the thing that you said it would do, because it can't.
It'd
So
be
you're better off
disappointing,
just saying, you know what, it's a language that does this, trust me, and not trying to show something that would never, you could never show it with and produce verisimilitude, because it's impossible. So just it would be like trying to build a warp drive. Like, yes, there's Star Trek technical manuals, but even the technical manuals have a bunch of hand waving, like, it uses dilithium, and dilithium is special, and you can't mine it on Earth, so, too bad. You can't actually try to build one. Because if they tried to put in detailed schematics of this is how it actually works, then somebody would just build it and be like, no, it doesn't. So you have to hand wave it and say, no, I'm not going to show it to you. I'm just going to say that it's a thing that does a thing, and then we run with that. And you get the same kind of issues in sci-fi linguistics.
Oh man, imagine an accurate Babel 17, and everyone just starts killing each other in the movie theater. Anyways, so but no, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I was actually thinking about how they were going to adapt Project Hail Mary. Kind of has some interesting language aspects to it.
I don't know how to feel about Project Hail Mary, because it could go really, really well, or it could go really, really wrong. And if it goes really, really wrong, it'll probably still be a great movie, and most people won't care, but I'll know. This brings up a rant that I have practiced many times. So when you get into conlangs for aliens, there's basically two categories for linguistic representation for aliens. There's three. You either hand wave it away and just have everybody speak English, the non-option, option 0. Option 1 is you create a language that is pronounceable by human actors, and we all just choose to ignore the fact that it is wildly unlikely that aliens would have human-compatible vocal tracts.
Yeah, I think a lot of people wouldn't even think about it, to be honest.
Yeah,
you and I would think about it.
But option 2 is you just do gibberish. There's a secret third option that has never been done in any film that I am aware of, like Hollywood or indie production or anything. Even though there have been multiple opportunities for it just in the last couple of years. And that is, just come up with a conlang that a human actor can't pronounce. And so like Avatar: The Way of Water really ticked me off for this. Because they've already got Paul Fromer on call for Na'vi. And they had, I want to say CJ Jones, maybe? I think it was CJ Jones. They had a deaf actor help out with creating the Reef Na'vi sign language. So there's 2 conlangs already in this film. And they've got people who are competent to create them. And then you've got the Tulkun, the second intelligent species on Pandora. And they're like modeled after whales, and their language sounds like whale song. But they are explicitly stated to actually have a language and be people who can, talk with the Na'vi and have conversations. And it's just random noises that the sound department thought sounded good. They didn't bother to just say, hey, Paul, could you please come talk to the sound department for 5 minutes and tell them what noises to make? And there's another film that's less well known, not as big of a major Hollywood deal, called Landscape with Invisible Hand, where they could have gotten away with not having an alien language and it would have been fine. But as it is, they put a lot of effort into frequently portraying aliens not speaking English, because they're very prominent in the film. And there's various mechanisms for translation, so that the human characters can understand what the aliens are saying and vice versa. But it's all gibberish. None of it is actually meaningful. It's not consistent. It doesn't correspond to the subtitles in any obvious way. And it would have been so easy. Like it would be such a tiny portion of any film's budget to get somebody in there and just say, construct enough of a grammar to cover the lines that we need, and just tell the sound department, this is the sounds that you should be playing at this time. But they just didn't do it. And so now Project Hail Mary is coming out. And I actually got in touch with Andy Weir a while ago when they were still in pre-production, and said, hey, wouldn't it be neat if the film did this right? And he said, yes, it would be neat if the film did this right. I'll pass your resume on to the directors. And then I never heard anything back. I didn't really expect to, but it would have been nice, So there's a little piece of me that is hoping that they did hire somebody to do it right. But
yeah,
especially because Andy Weir in the book actually does describe a very small number of concrete examples of what Rocky's speech is supposed to sound like, which you can use as a basis to start building off of. But yeah, based on how things have gone with Hollywood films in the past, I am very, very worried they're going to screw it up.
There's little hope, I see. I feel like I need to write down this third option and like hide it under my bed. But that's funny that you actually got in contact with Andy Weir. Wasn't expecting that. Anyways, we'll see how that goes, though, right? Isn't that supposed to come out this year? I don't remember.
I think so. They wrapped up photography last fall, so it's in post-production now.
Okay. Well, I have a couple questions for you, actually.
All right.
And this is kind of tangential in a sense, but besides the fact that you're already super busy, it sounds like. What do you like writes? Do you write screenplays? Do you write like fiction or?
I have written fiction. It's been a while, because I've got a day job and 3 kids, and there are successful novelists who have a day job and 3 kids. So what the heck am I complaining about? But it's hard. I've got ideas, I've got drafts, but I haven't really put a lot of effort into it for a good long time. Maybe someday after I retire, then I'll go back and try to rewrite some of my old story ideas and have a second career as a middle-list sci-fi author.
You're not going to make
that. Yeah. That seems unlikely. But in the meantime, I very slowly work on nonfiction about fiction.
Yes, which is important. And then earlier you mentioned, I guess you kind of talked about this a little bit, but you mentioned some movies and things that you wish would have done like a Conlang when they didn't. Do you have like any other like examples of that, or do you have any thoughts on Luca, for example? Or
I was wondering when you'd bring that up. So Luca didn't need a Conlang. Luca just needed consistency. So the issue with
like the Italian, or
the issue with Luca is that the sea monsters supposedly do not speak Italian at the beginning. And like there's humorous bits where Bruno like pretends that he knows what things mean, and so he tells Luca to say certain Italian phrases, and then the old ladies get mad at him, and it's hilarious. But the sea monsters are always portrayed to the audience as speaking English, and whenever a plot relevant human character is speaking in a way that the audience needs to understand what they're saying, then they're portrayed in English, and the sea monsters always understand them. So when it is convenient for a joke, there is a language barrier and the sea monsters don't understand Italian. Otherwise, there's no language barrier. Everybody can understand everybody all the time, and it's unclear whether or not they're actually in world supposed to be speaking Italian. So if I turn off my brain and just watch it with my kids, then Luca is a great, fun movie. But they really screwed up on the linguistic consistency.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that is fair. That's fair. And yeah, I haven't watched that movie in a long while, so I see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I do. Let's see another one. Do you have any like favorites? So most of the people who watch my channel read books. Do you have any favorite like books? I guess that utilize not necessarily Conlangs, but maybe Conlangs, but like just language, like handle language in a swell way.
Yes. So, well, we were talking about this earlier, but Babel, which you hate,
just the plots.
The linguistics is yes. The linguistics is great. If you ignore the plot, like there is a good first semester course in translation theory in that book, and they do a good job of talking accurately about linguistics as a science, and also of representing foreign languages as appropriate in ways that are accessible to the reader. But my favorite so far, which I don't think I have on my desk right now. I need to figure out where I put it. I've got the sequel ready at hand. So this is book 2. Book 1 is A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. And it's basically Aztecs in space. So the main character is a non-citizen, a foreigner from a different human civilization that gets appointed to be the ambassador to the major human empire, which is constantly expanding and conquering other colonies and so forth. And the aesthetics of the dominant culture are strongly inspired by classical Mesoamerica. And so you don't get, if I recall correctly, I don't think you get even a single complete sentence of Teixcalánli in the book. But you get a few individual words and a pronunciation guide at the back, and a lot of descriptions of how the language works in comparison to the language of our main character, who is a foreigner coming in and studying it. So yeah, that's my favorite. It's really good. Oh, actually, The Goblin Emperor. I'm blanking on the author right now. That might actually be my favorite. I had forgotten about it while I was thinking of A Memory Called Empire, because that one's just so good. But The Goblin Emperor is also just so good. And it does, well, I think, other people might disagree, I think it does a really good job of introducing the in-world language in such a way that you can pick up on as much of it as you need to without it being explicitly explained to you. I think it might work better in text than it does in audio, because my sister reads a lot of books in audio form. I mostly read still like actual physical books or ebooks, and very few audio books. My sister is the opposite. She mostly does audio, and we book clubbed on The Goblin Emperor. And according to her, she had a really hard time keeping track of all of the Elven language in audio form. But she had an easier time when she got the book from the library and could see it on the page. So that's actually something I should look into in more depth, because I don't have a ton of research on audiobooks yet, and the techniques for linguistic representation and comprehensibility are different in different mediums. Like they're different in film than they are in books, and they're different again in audiobooks, and that's something I really need to spend more time with.
Yeah, that's the one thing actually I see with linguists as opposed to philologists sometimes, is that they're like, there's just all these like things that are just like super exciting to linguists. I'm just like, yeah, I guess that is related to the field or whatever. And I'm like, and that would be part of it. And I just don't think about it. Anyways, so like, maybe that's just me. It's probably just me. Anyways, I'm gonna. So that's funny actually. I don't think I've read, like, besides Babel, whatever we talked about earlier. I haven't read a memory called Empire or The Goblin Emperor, but it was interesting to know, for sure. And so I have a couple more questions. Maybe I can rapid fire them. This says we're like 3 minutes shy of an hour, but
yeah.
Or what are your thoughts on Sangheili and Halo? I guess.
So I know the people who were involved with that.
Oh. Cool.
So it was David Peterson and Carl Buck. David did most of the actual like linguistic language construction stuff. Carl, I believe, was more focused on the script design, but they both worked on it. So my thoughts are that as an audience member, I thought they did a good job with how they integrated it. Those the people who did it behind the scenes, they are annoyed at how the production team butchered it and underutilized it. So I guess they could have done a lot better.
Okay, interesting. I think Sangheili is interesting just because, well, in some way, like they have 4 jaws and they're like more like mandible things. Anyways, and then I just have like mostly just like questions to see if you are familiar with some of the things that, like, when I think of, actually I mostly am thinking of sci-fi books, and how they kind of approach language, just in general, they just kind of approach it. A Man of Gold by Mar Barker, M-A-R Barker. He's the guy who did Tecumel. Okay, if you're familiar with Tecumel.
Yeah.
He's a linguist, I believe. He's got like, if I remember correctly, I read it recently, is like 128 pronouns for like addressing like people or something like that, which he doesn't, if I remember correctly, it doesn't actually put any of it in there though. There's no actual constructed language that I remember reading in the book. Right? He just talks about that stuff. But maybe there are in the tabletop role-playing game. I don't have that. But I don't know if you're familiar with that at all.
So I have not actually read any of the Tecumel books. I am aware of them because of their historical significance to the Conlanging community. So I can tell you that Solyani is well regarded as a well-constructed artistic language. But yeah, I know stuff about Solyani. I don't really know a whole lot about Tecumel, except that it was the setting that M.A.R. Barker put Solyani in. And unfortunately, so there's kind of like a J.K. Rowling thing going on with Barker, where the art is good until you find out some stuff about his personal life and other publications that I don't know if it's always been there and people are just now getting sensitive to it, or if it was just more recent revelations. But I know several people personally, and so there's probably more out there that I don't know personally, who are just like, I don't know if I feel good about liking Solyani anymore because the guy who made it is kind of gross.
Okay. I see. I haven't heard anything like that, but I also didn't know Solyani was like an actual language. I didn't know he.
Yeah.
I assumed he had, right? Because I knew he was a linguist
Yep.
and he had spent many years working on this stuff. But
Yep.
yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of. I mean, I understand that. Like Marion Zimmer Bradley, like grosses me out to the point that like I've read a couple of her things, but like I just can't anymore. Like it's just not.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen, right? And so. I had not known anything, and I still don't, besides what you just said about Barker. But okay, another question, real quick though, because I think we just hit our hour mark. Embassy Town by China Miéville. Have you read or are you familiar with that at all?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so that's another good example of where the story would be made worse if you tried to construct a real conlang and stick it in there for people to learn. If I recall correctly, there are some examples of individual words in the host's language. I haven't read it for a while, so I don't remember what they are. I'm pretty sure they've got examples of individual words and translations to the English equivalents. But there's like no full sentences or anything. There's no grammar of the language. It's just, it's presented nebulously as like, this is the vibes of the language and some assertions about how it works, which are like the premise of the book is that the Ariake don't conceive of linguistic communication in the same way that humans do. So their language does not work like human languages. And I'm actually going to next Saturday with the Apex Writing Group. There are things you can do in that vein where you could construct a language that does the things you say that it does and is not learnable by humans. But Embassy Town is not one of those situations. They're going like high concept philosophical stuff. And yeah, I liked it. I liked Embassy Town, and it works better when you don't try to look at it too closely.
That's fair. Another one that I think, if I remember correctly, goes into it less than, say, Embassy Town does, but kind of similar is The Player of Games by Ian M. Banks.
I haven't read that yet. It's on my bookshelf. It's on my reading list.
Okay, yeah. Well,
I'll get to it eventually.
It kind of gets into this language thing going on with the... I don't even remember the name of the people that's not part of the culture.
The culture?
Yeah.
Oh,
so the main character leaves the culture and he's part of the culture. Yeah. And he goes to play a game, and they have the way their language works and is interesting how it interacts with like their society and culture and stuff. Lowercase c culture. Right. So, but yeah, it's just interesting that like I had a thought actually when you were talking about earlier about like how you can't really help to be disappointed when something like obviously doesn't work how it does when you're like adapting or whatever. I thought of like the Ancient Language in Aragon, which is a younger person's series, right? But I read it when I was a teenager, and like he even has a glossary at the back, right? But then like, okay, well, I say Brazinger, there's no fire, so it's like immediately less interesting, right? So I mean, like, but I did have like, I guess since your presentation was like on multiple languages being portrayed, not necessarily Conlangs again. You mentioned oh goodness, you mentioned a Russian book, and I'm blanking on what it is.
War and Peace.
War and Peace. Okay, yeah. And yeah, you mentioned that. I haven't read it actually, so I probably would have known when you asked the audience.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I didn't know there's French in there. But like,
Yep.
so that is interesting. It does make me think of there's an old English poem actually called "The Phoenix," and the very last, it's a somewhat longer, if I remember correctly, a couple hundred lines at least. The very last, like, it's not stanza, right? But it, last lines, last stanza if there were stanzas. And it's the first half line is in Old English, and the second half line is in Latin, and it actually
that's
decently
neat.
well follows the rules of like Old English poetry and Latin poetry. And I think it works. It's really cool, actually. I really like the End of the Phoenix. But and it's just a fine poem overall. But I think that shows a good example of someone who was bilingual in that sense, right? Because the person writing it down was almost certainly educated, probably a monk or something like that, right? And would have known Latin. And Old English is kind of weird anyways, because most people in the western part of Europe at the time actually really almost wrote exclusively in Latin, right? English is just like, yeah, we're going to write in English too, because for whatever reason, which I'm happy with, right? But and so it's just really cool, the Phoenix, but also something like DJ Butler's Witchy Eye, right? I don't know. Have you read Witchy Eye?
I have read Witchy Eye, and then I put it on the shelf, and I never quite got around to the sequels. There's so many other books to read. I'll get to it. I'll get to the rest of it eventually. But yeah, I read it a while ago.
Yeah, I just remember, it's been a while for me too, but I just remember. Sorry, there's someone knocking at my door. I'm almost done. Anyways, but that it's there's like it's mostly for English speakers, right? It's not like enough. Well, I feel like it's not enough really to annoy people that don't get, because it's really like small bits. It's mostly French in the first book, right? Because they're in like New Orleans or whatever. I thought my French knowledge really came in handy actually, but so like, but it's nice.
It's not a bilingual book,
right? Yeah,
it's not a bilingual book the way that War and Peace is, because Dave doesn't expect that his audience is going to be bilingual in order to be able to read it.
Yeah, right. That's why it's like minimal. I think it does help in a sense when you can understand it, because I don't remember him really holding your hand with it, but it's not like he needs to hold your hand with it. It's really not that much. Like you said, it's not bilingual. So it's just nice to have like bits and pieces in there. Like I know Dave also put in, he gave Christopher Rocchio the Akkadian for one of the later Sun Eater books, and I'm like, that's just weird, but cool at the same time. So but anyways, but not again bilingual at all in that sense. But anyways, that is the end of my rapid fire stuff.
All right,
we're already good, I guess. But thanks again, Logan, for coming on.
Yeah, no problem.
Really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Good.
And like, so I'll link all your stuff below. And if anyone has questions, you could probably leave comments. I don't know if Logan will hang around there, but maybe they could reach out to you.
I'll check your comments.
Too, so, who knows if I'll get any comments, because I don't on half my videos, right? But you deserve all the comments. So, anyways, but yeah, thanks again.
Well, thanks.
It's been fun, and yeah, well, bye everyone watching on YouTube, I guess.
Bye.